This is one of the biggest and tallest buildings in the world. But you've probably never heard of it. The Makkah Royal Clock Tower is a triumph of engineering. At 35 times the size of Big Ben, it has the world's largest clock. With an estimated cost of $16 billion, it's one of the most expensive buildings ever constructed. And at 600 meters high, it contains what is to this day the highest occupied man-made space on the planet. Seeing the tower rise above the city of Mecca, it's hard to get a true sense of its unbelievable scale. This building is in fact so huge that we need to take a moment to show it in comparison to the tallest building in Europe, the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere, the tallest building in Asia, and of course the tallest building in the world. In whatever city you place it, from Sydney to LA, this clock tower would utterly dominate the skyline. Construction firms from over 10 different countries worked on the skyscraper, including a German firm which designed the clock. But because of its location in Mecca, many of the engineers and architects couldn't visit the site. After all, only Muslims are allowed in the sacred city.
Mecca is very conservative. There's a passport control. There is like a border going into another country.
Some of the construction team, including glazing experts from Poland and Germany, converted to Islam so they could work on the projects.
The company Riva is near Stuttgart in Germany, and their owner, he converted to Islam during that project to be able to come on site and see for himself what's going on and what's happening.
This is the wild story of how one of the world's most unique and ostentatious skyscrapers was built. The Makkah Royal Clock Tower isn't just a hotel. It can't be. It's located in the heart of one of the most culturally significant cities in the world. This is Mecca. Every year, up to 3 million Muslims travel here to complete a pilgrimage known as the Hajj. Those completing the Hajj circle around the Kabba 7 times. It's an ancient ritual that every Muslim must complete at least once in their life. This site is thousands of years old, extremely delicate and constantly crowded. And just a few hundred meters away across the road was where this enormous hotel was set to be constructed. It's pretty much the exact opposite of a straightforward construction site.
It's right in the center of Mecca city, inside the first ring road, which is really the most congested area in Saudi Arabia, and the center of Islam. All Muslims want to go there. You have the holy mosque with the Kaaba in the middle.
The religious tourism market is the second largest source of income for Saudi Arabia after hydrocarbons. It contributes some $12 billion annually to the kingdom's economy. That means that Mecca has the largest number of hotel rooms in the Arab world, far surpassing Dubai. It's perhaps then not a huge surprise that this enormous hotel would be constructed here.
And due to the nature of it sitting so closely to the Kaaba and in this very, let's say, sensitive environment, the client reached out to us and wanted to elaborate with us ideas on bringing more meaning to the building.
The hotel needed to be more than just a commercial building because of its location. It needed to be something spiritual.
So we started thinking about what such a building could stand for. And then one of the ideas that was created in those several meetings and brainstormings was that the main tower could function as the minaret of Mecca. At the time when it was planned, would have been the highest building in the world.
The hotel was originally supposed to be just 450 meters high, which would still have made it the tallest building in the world at the start of its construction in 2002. When the decision was taken to transform it into a grand minaret, the height was extended to 600 meters.
Burj Khalifa was not built yet. That was also in planning. And they, of course, then once it was clear that this tower will be 600 meters, they raised to 800 meters, took the record for that one.
But turning this hotel into an enormous minaret wasn't enough. The client wanted even more. Time plays an important role in Islam. There is, of course, the call to prayer that happens 5 times a day. The adhan is the first call to prayer and is usually made from the top of a minaret. The idea of then making this building into a clock tower as well came very naturally. Now, this clock would establish a new second time standard in addition to Greenwich Mean Time. All over the world, Muslims would be able to know the precise atomic time in Mecca. That would allow Muslims to begin holidays and special occasions like Ramadan simultaneously, regardless of where they are on Earth. But there was just one pretty massive problem. Half of the building was already built. By the time the Saudis wanted to extend the height and add that clock tower, half of this hotel was completed. The foundations were well and truly laid and had been designed for a 450-metre tower, not a 600-metre one. That limited the weight of the building to just 82,000 tonnes. For contrast, Shanghai Tower, which rises to a comparable 632 metres, weighs 575,000 tonnes.
So we went into checking the foundations, how were the foundations laid out, how were they calculated, what forces were they allowed to hold, and we saw that they have a lot of reserves in. It's a typical measure in Mecca, that all the buildings have a lot of reserves just for the sheer fact that there is so many people moving through the city and they want to be on the absolute safe side. And then together with a German structural engineer, Meyer Ludischer and partner, we started developing then an ultra lightweight structure that could be placed on top of this concrete tower.
The engineers and designers needed to create a tall, lightweight but strong structure to put on top of the existing hotel. Fortunately, history had already solved that problem. Rewind the clock to 1889 and Gustav Eiffel was planning to build the tallest man-made structure in time for the World's Fair. To build it high and fast and to ensure it didn't sink under its own weight, he came up with the now iconic wrought iron framework structure. This allowed the tower to soar to new heights and redistributed its weight downwards to its base. The engineers of the clock tower began sketching their design by placing the Eiffel Tower on top of the existing hotel. They used high-strength steel and concrete instead of wrought iron, but kept the idea of a framework structure that grew more slender as it rose, like the trunk of a tree. They also kept the same engineering principles from the Eiffel Tower. They would then build their clock and minarets around that framework structure. The lightweight design was then placed on 5 transfer slabs on top of the hotel. There were, of course, a number of limitations that came with this approach. The distance between floors, for example, had to be far higher than normal.
Behind the clock, one floor level is about 12 meters, 13 meters. You could not go with typical floors, then the weight would have been exceeded. And then also, the floors are cut out. There's a big void in those floors.
The voids, which made the floors way less, were then incorporated into the design and used to display large exhibits and artworks.
So it works well with the exhibition, but that was actually also a reason to reduce the weight of the building.
Now, throughout this video, you're going to see a very different type of on-site health and safety and labour culture to the one that many of you are familiar with and that we at the B1M advocate for. But we've made the decision to bring you the footage in any case to tell the extraordinary engineering story of this project. With the structure worked out, it was time to turn their attention to building the world's biggest clock. The architect of the tower worked with Perot, a German company that had been designing clocks since 1860.
There was a lot of different design iterations that went into the clock mechanism, the clock hands. How do you operate such a big clock, especially in that height?
The clock hands were one of the biggest challenges.
Because of the size of the clock and its immense height, the first challenge was figuring out how to keep the hands from blowing away in the wind. A number of designs were considered, including having the tips of the hands guided by a peripheral track, similar to how a Ferris wheel works or a roller coaster. But that idea turned out to be too heavy. It also had too many moving parts that could malfunction and would eventually need replacing. You would also see the track underneath, ruining the facade.
We didn't like the idea to have a slit, a circular slit around the facade.
So they needed something lightweight and simple. It was decided the hands would be made of carbon fibre, and they would be controlled by a centrally installed clock drive that could hold both of them. The hands themselves measure 23 metres and 17 metres respectively. For comparison, Big Ben's hands are 4.2 metres and 2.7 metres.
With a fantastic team of engineers, we find out that we could use a special carbon fiber to make this clock hand cantilever. So we have this 22-meter long clock hand, mini clock hand, which is completely cantilever. Of course, they have counterweights on the other end to balance.
The wind pressure on this gigantic clock face was also tremendous, not just on the hands, but also on the facade.
The clock face was designed to be slightly concave to shield the hands from the wind, which at this height could reach up to 200 kilometers an hour.
The concavity of the clock was in order to keep the clock hands within the profile of the building. So that's why you have this dished form for the clock.
There are 4 clock drives, actually 5. The 5th one was also put up on the platform as a spare. And we also have a spare set of clock hands. They are so big that you can actually access them and walk in them. We have a special maintenance switch that actually parks them both in a horizontal position. Once this connection is made, a human being can slide through them. At least it can be done quite easily. You don't have to build a scaffolding that's 500 meters high.
The designers conducted a number of tests to figure out the colours of the clock. It was especially important to work out how it should be lit up at night so it could be most legible.
The obvious idea, let's backlit the facade, but was directly dismissed because technology and quality and definition of the architectural details.
After several trial runs under different weather conditions and with different colour combinations, it was decided that instead of black and white, the clock face would be green and white, and that LED lights would be used. Now, green and white was chosen because of how the human eye works. When green light refracts in the eye, it focuses on the image plane of the retina, creating a sharper image. These colour combinations would ensure the clock face could be seen clearly from more than 8 kilometres away. Each LED pixel placed on the clock face was installed 105mm from the next one. That's so that from a distance it would appear as a single green surface. Staggeringly, more than 2 million LEDs were used to illuminate the tower in total.
These LED lights were also specifically developed for the task. It took about a year, I think, till we finally were happy with the outcome. The problem is that if these LEDs get very hot, their lifetime is reduced dramatically. We have a hot climate there. The problem was to find the right casting as a cooling body for the individual LEDs.
Now, while this painstaking attention to detail certainly added to the $16 billion cost, for the Saudi royal family, spending on the finer details has been worth it for a long time. A Saudi prince once purchased Salvator Mundi, the most expensive painting in the world, at $450 million US. These super wealthy figures see this fine art as an investment, one that's even outpaced more traditional assets like stocks or real estate. But even if you don't have a royal checkbook, then don't worry, because you can still unlock the high-powered world of art investing yourself thanks to today's video sponsor, Masterworks. Over 900,000 members have signed on to the art investing platform because no art expertise is required. Previous investable offerings from legends like Picasso, Kors and Banksy have sometimes sold out within minutes. Since so many of the B1M subscribers have signed on so far, you can still skip the waitlist and start investing today with the QR code on screen, the link in the description, or by visiting masterworks.art/the B1M. Past performance is not indicative of future returns, and investing does involve risk. You can see important Regulation A disclosures at masterworks.com/CD. Now, let's get back to that massive clock tower. In keeping with Islamic traditions, the facade of the tower is covered in 98 million mosaic tiles, each measuring 20 by 20mm. The glass tiles came in 13 different colours, 1/3 of which contain 24-karat gold leaf. The order for the tiles was so immense that the Venetian company producing them had to invent a new way to automate the process just to get it done.
This is a very good company that was chosen for their quality. But at that time, particularly the gold tiles were manufacturing an amount of 15 to 20 square meters a month. And we were in necessity of 250, 300 square meters a month to catch up with the construction. We developed together with them a robotic system. So also there from manual operation to a mixed technology of robotics and manual.
The tiles themselves had to be rigorously tested to ensure they could withstand the extreme weather at the top of this building.
Everything has been tested in lab or also weather, fire tests, and all the possible tests were made.
Now, much of the tower was prefabricated in Dubai, a city that kinda knows a thing or two about megastructures. The 98 million tiles were sent here and put on the facade piece by piece, all by hand. More than 100 people worked on the mosaics, and only the best, most flawless tiles were selected. These finished pieces of the facade were then broken down and taken across the desert in trucks in a 3-day journey to Mecca, where they were reassembled. The clock face itself was also built in Dubai first, so they could see what it would look like firsthand. This was done partly to test the structure, but also because many of the architects and engineers working on the building couldn't travel to Mecca themselves to see it finished. This approach allowed them to make any necessary adjustments before the clock face was finally installed.
We had to erect a quarter of the clock, so we had to rebuild a main structure, the substructure of the clock and the clock for a quarter of it.
It too was then dismantled and sent to Mecca. The very top of the structure was also prefabricated in Dubai. This crescent moon structure would reach for the sky and house the highest prayer room in the world.
The crescent of this half moon, that is a typical element that put on top of the minaret.
The crescent itself is the biggest carbon fiber structure ever built.
It contains 3 floors with the prayer room, a meeting room, and an office.
There is an elevator climbing all the way up to the top of the spire. From there, there are, I remember, something like 15, 18 meters of a spiral staircase leading you to the crescent.
Finally, the time came to lift the prayer room to its final place at the top of the tower. It had been severed into several parts so it could be trucked to Mecca, but there was just one problem. Where the prayer room had to be lifted up to was so high, the crane couldn't reach it.
There's a spiral stair that goes through the spine of the crescent, or let's say that the neck of the crescent. And a friend of mine and myself, we always went up that spiral stair to take a break, went there to smoke a cigarette. It was beautiful. You sit, there's nothing around you. And we knew, okay, from the program that the crescent will come in within the next 2 weeks. And then we looked on the tower and said, that's a bit weird. That the tower crane at the time was only then reaching with the tip kind of to that platform.
With very limited time left, they had to raise the crane to its absolute limit.
The tower crane was then at a height of 200 plus meters. And then quite a heavy load on it. The one segment of this crescent was 7 to 8 tons. The capacity of the crane then got to its limit because the height was, everything was at its limit. The height was just enough. The capacity, the weight of the crescent was exactly on the limit of the crane.
Then came the wind. 600 meters above the ground, riggers strapped into harnesses, some on the structure, others on the tower, bracing themselves against the forces. The crescent soon began spinning out of control.
Yeah, I think there were 2 or 3 guys that really got sick because it was rotating. It was really one of the most stressful days on site.
The team on the viewing platform had to use ropes to steady the structure and bring it into place.
The poor crane driver, I think he was going nuts because on the walkie-talkie and people from down all yelling at him, "Oh, be careful, watch out this one, watch this, and it's turning and it's doing this and whatever." Took quite a while, took longer than anticipated, but they managed it.
With the prayer room in place, the tower was officially topped out. To this day, it's still the highest occupiable space on any man-made structure. The Burj Khalifa's highest occupied floor is at 585 meters, while Shanghai Towers is at 583. Both pale in comparison to this prayer room sitting 600 meters above Mecca.
Then we had the opening ceremony where the king actually came to Mecca and then pressed the red button and all the lights went on. And that was a great moment. That was really, really good. I mean, it's like 3 years of hardcore pressure and stress, and it all came to a success. But it was just a great moment. One of the best moments in my life, that's for sure.
The clock tower now stands as a symbol of Mecca in the 21st century, a place steeped in history with an important role in the lives of millions of people today. There isn't another building like it, and there probably never will be.
I think it's totally different from any other, even the most spectacular buildings of extreme height. They will never compete with this shape and this function. It's the only tower that gives its own time signal for Muslims worldwide. Anything which is of a unification purpose in these days is very important, and that may be the real value of this structure.
Despite shattering so many records, this building is still remarkably unknown in the Western world.
At the beginning, I was a little bit disappointed or sad. I managed to understand that maybe it's even good for the building. In the contemporary architecture, the building is not even finished and is already on the magazine or on internet. People talk for 1 month and then it's forgotten. So I assume this building is slowly metabolized by the city. It's becoming an icon and slowly will become, in the time, an essential building.
I think the building in itself will remain an icon for Saudi, and it will remain an icon for the whole Islamic world. Because of course, many Muslims have worked on the building. There were at times up to 15,000, 17,000 construction workers on that complex. All of them Muslim and all from different countries all over the world. So there is pretty much every country has kind of a story, a connection to that building, which you do not have in typical buildings.
The biggest clock for me personally has not that importance. This big clock has offered this opportunity to explore materials, technology, to have new space behind. So it's a completely different building than from a stereotype skyscraper, you know.
Despite working on the project for several years, many of the lead architects have never seen the building in real life.
Oh, no, I couldn't. And there is one thing the architect can do, they can imagine quite well. So, of course, to stand there, look at, walk around would be fantastic. But let's say in my head is quite well represented and imagined.
I can say that I didn't convert. The closest I ever got physically was 20 kilometers, which is already inside the confines of Mecca. My driver didn't realize that he had a non-believer on board. He stopped in the middle of the motorway and made a U-turn and drove me back out again. This building is so gigantic, you can see it from 50 miles away or even further.
We're now seeing so many new projects being announced in Saudi Arabia, from giant linear cities to desert arenas, all with fresh skepticism as to whether they can be achieved. And while that of course remains to be seen, the Mecca Royal Clock Tower is in many ways the first Saudi mega project. Whatever comes next, it remains a towering accomplishment in its own right, and will in all likelihood stand the test of time. This video was sponsored by Masterworks. You can learn more about that at the links, guys. If you enjoyed this video and you want to get more from the definitive video channel for construction, make sure you're subscribed to the B1M.